lost ancient civilizations you've never heard of. The Norte Chico. Typically, when you think of ancient civilizations from the Americas, you think of the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Inca. But did you know that there was an ancient civilization in South America that not only predated all of those civilizations by over 1,000 years, but was also so old that it took place during the time that the pyramids were being built? The civilization I'm about to discuss with you is so old that it is actually known as a pre-ceramic civilization, meaning that for how surprisingly technologically advanced they were, which we'll get into, their entire society lived without any form of pottery. If that's not ancient, I don't know what is. Let me explain. The Norte Chico ancient civilization was located on modern-day coastal Peru and existed roughly from 3500 BC to 1800 BC. And it's significant not only because of its mystery, but because it is considered to be one of the oldest complex civilizations to ever exist in the Americas. Academic suspicions of an ancient civilization existing in coastal Peru date all the way back to 1905. But it wasn't until the 1990s when the city of Corral, the location where the Norte Chico existed, actually started to be documented and excavated. And it wasn't until 2001 when a major publication came out revealing the findings of these excavations, which essentially proved that there was a very significant site in coastal Peru that not only had a mysterious advanced civilization living on it, but it was also extremely old. A finding that more or less shocked archaeologists at the time. Now, diving back into the Norte Chico civilization itself, let's discuss some of the facts and some of the mystery surrounding it. Factually speaking, as I mentioned earlier, the Norte Chico civilization existed during the same time when the pyramids in Egypt were being built. And interestingly, the Norte Chico people were building their own pyramid as well, in their most populous city of Corral. Now, the fact that they were building pyramids is significant on its own, but it's not only the pyramids of the Norte Chico that archaeologists awe at, because this civilization is recognized by its monumental architecture in many forms, including, obviously, its pyramids, but also its large ceremonial centers, as well as surprisingly sophisticated urban planning. It's believed that the city of Corral itself had a population of around 3,000 people, which at the time was extremely massive, considering that not long before the establishment of this civilization, the early peoples living in this location were essentially small hunter-gatherer tribes. Now, interestingly, while the Norte Chico people left plenty of architecture for archaeologists to study, they didn't leave much else, which is where a lot of the mystery kind of comes into play. As of today, there has not been any form of currency, written language, pottery, art, weapons, or even tools that have been found and associated with the Norte Chico civilization, which is extremely interesting considering how not only massive but influential the Norte Chico civilization was. And I say this because archaeologists believe that the Norte Chico people, through their architecture in the city of Corral, essentially built the foundation for other ancient civilizations to come that later spread across all of South America. Now, taking a step back and focusing on some of the artifacts that were missing, because there was no armor, weapons, or mutilated bodies found in association with the Norte Chico civilization, it is believed by historians and archaeologists that this civilization was relatively peaceful, and not only existed, but thrived off of trade rather than conquest, which is surprisingly wholesome. And this wholesomeness is kind of continued when you understand the fact that this civilization was focused more on culture than it was on warfare, because there is no record of any sort of military activity whatsoever. However, they did leave massive amphitheaters, which I could only imagine saw some of the most interesting of shows. But the fact that the civilization built massive grounds for congregation and not one wall or military base is rather interesting. I would have to assume that there was at least some musical performances going on because, interestingly, while there was extremely few artifacts that were found in the city of Corral associated with the Norte Chico people, one set of artifacts that was discovered was a set of handcrafted flutes made out of bird bones hidden in one of the pyramids, which is extremely cool. But in case being a peaceful civilization that was thriving and played the flute wasn't cool enough, there is also evidence to suggest that these people were not only chilling, but also getting a little elevated as well, if you catch my drift. The Norte Chico civilization were essentially a walking contradiction to most beliefs that were held of civilizations at this time. One, because it existed out of the primary three locations where it was believed that civilization was spawning from at the time, but on top of this, it was also believed that for any civilization to exist and thrive, agriculture was a vital cornerstone of that development. And while that seems logical, for Norte Chico, that wasn't necessarily the case. And that's because the Norte Chico civilization had an economy and diet heavily dependent on the nearby oceans. And while it's believed that the city of Corral had proper irrigation systems, evidence suggests that a lot of the agriculture that these irrigation systems sustained were not actually food, but cotton, likely used to produce textiles that were either sold or traded to nearby settlements. This civilization existed in a place where, for the longest time, nobody even believed there was any ancient civilizations. And besides the fact that their mere existence contradicts so much that was believed by archaeologists at the time, they also went on to not only exist but thrive in a society that was organized, advanced, and prolific, while seemingly also being peaceful, relying on trade and seemingly entertainment, as suggested by the massive amphitheaters. I don't know about you, but I think there is just so much to love about the Norte Chico people. And in my opinion, they're kind of the underdogs of ancient civilizations, which is why I wanted to put them first on this list. Now, I think we can all agree that the mysterious aspects of these ancient civilizations are just so interesting. But not everything in life should be a mystery. Specifically, finding a healthcare professional that best suits your needs, which is why today's video is sponsored by ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors, choose the right one for your needs, and instantly click to book an appointment. From mental health to dental health to eye care to skincare, ZocDoc makes it easy to book an in-network appointment with more than 100,000 healthcare professionals. One of the many perks of ZocDoc is you can filter by insurance, location, specialty, and even reviews by verified patients. And when you found the doctor that you need, you can see their actual appointment openings and choose a time that works best for you and book a visit within a few clicks. ZocDoc appointments are not only convenient, but they're fast, typically taking place within 24 to 72 hours of booking. Stop waiting and stop guessing and start getting the care you need today. Go to ZocDoc.com/TrustMeBro to instantly find and book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/TrustMeBro to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. Thank you so much, ZocDoc, for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's continue with some ancient civilizations. And while there is still a ton of mystery associated with the Norte Chico people, potentially one of the biggest mysteries is what exactly happened to them. And the best guess that we have as of right now was that around the time of 1800 BC, there was a gradual decline of the city of Corral and other surrounding establishments due to a decline of maritime resources and a drying up of the existing irrigation systems. And it's theorized that the Norte Chico people didn't just vanish, but actually moved north and integrated into other societies of the time. Which leads us to today. As of right now, basically everything we know is, for the most part, what I told you. However, fortunately, the city of Corral still has most of its ruins still intact to this very day, and you can go visit them. They were never destroyed and never built over. They were simply abandoned once the Norte Chico people decided it was time to move on. And honestly, I hope more information is found out about the civilization in the near future, because based on the information we have, this civilization seemed pretty cool. Gobekli Tepe. If you thought the Norte Chico was an old civilization, well, Gobekli Tepe is about to blow your mind. Gobekli Tepe, admittedly, is not a civilization. It is actually an archaeological site. And the reason it's on this list is because obviously this site was created by some civilization, but that civilization is the root of the mystery at play. The Gobekli Tepe settlement was inhabited from around 9500 BC to at least 8000 BC, which is nearly 12,000 years ago, which for context is roughly 7,000 years before the pyramids were built. Gobekli Tepe and the unknown civilization surrounding it is extremely mysterious and, in my opinion, extremely cool, which is why I knew I had to discuss it. Gobekli Tepe is located in modern-day Turkey, but interestingly, for how old this archaeological site is, it wasn't rediscovered until the 1960s. However, the true importance of this site wasn't really understood until the 1990s, meaning that this roughly 12,000-year-old secret has only just been uncovered, and we are still only scratching the surface of what it could even mean. Similar to Norte Chico, Gobekli Tepe shatters a lot of beliefs surrounding civilizations at the time, with one of the most prominent being that agriculture was mandatory for any form of civilization to exist. However, Gobekli Tepe kind of directly contradicts that, primarily because this massive archaeological site existed long before the invention of agriculture, meaning that it was built and inhabited by people that were believed to be extremely simple hunter-gatherer tribes. But this unknown mysterious civilization didn't only lack agriculture, it also lacked any form of metal tools, any form of writing, and of course, any form of pottery. And I know I've harped on pottery a couple times in this video so far, but understand that the invention of pottery was crucial to civilization at the time. However, due to the massive amount of mystery surrounding the civilization that built Gobekli Tepe, the only thing we really have to discuss at this point is what they left behind, which is, of course, this extremely impressive archaeological site, which I want to go into a bit of detail about. The site itself consists of circular enclosures built out of massive stone pillars. And not only are these pillars mysterious by default due to their sheer massive size, with some of them weighing up to 40,000 pounds, these pillars are also covered in intricate carvings of different animals and other questionable symbols. In more recent times, by alternative archaeologists, it's been speculated that these pillars were built with astronomy in mind, although that has been heavily debated. And regardless of what their true intention may or may not be, the answer is we truly don't know why it was built, and we also have no idea how it was built. As keep in mind, during this time, nearly 12,000 years ago, the wheel was not even invented yet, let alone metal tools, making the creation process itself an entirely separate, seemingly unsolvable mystery. As I mentioned earlier, today, archaeologists are only beginning to crack open the case on what Gobekli Tepe could have meant, who it was made by, and what it truly all even means, not only for the civilization that created it, but also what it means for our current understanding of human history. As the discovery and study of this archaeological site has already broken so many beliefs that have been held for so long until, well, now. And it's the shattering of some of these beliefs that have been extremely controversial and, well, met with resistance from the greater archaeological community. But that is kind of outside the scope of this video. All you really need to know is that somewhere hidden in Turkey, there is an extremely interesting and unknown site built by simple hunter-gatherers nearly 12,000 years ago for reasons we don't know, with tools we don't understand, by people we can't identify. It seemed to have been used for roughly 1,000 to 2,000 years, and then it was believed by some that it was intentionally buried or abandoned and buried over time, to then only be rediscovered nearly 12,000 years later in the 1990s. And if there's one thing we know about Gobekli Tepe, it's that the people who created it definitely loved to carve animals. And honestly, they were pretty great at it. The Lycians. Staying in modern-day Turkey for just a bit longer, let's discuss the Lycians, a super interesting group of people. The civilization existed in a city known as Lycia, which geographically was located basically directly on the Mediterranean Sea. And unsurprisingly, the Lycians were known as very effective seafarers, both in trade and battle. The Lycians had a very distinct, independent culture, although there was some traceable influences from their neighbors, the Greeks and the Persians. Some of the more obvious influences from these other civilizations were the Lycian alphabet that was relatively similar to the Greek alphabet, although still distinct and to this day rather mysterious considering there's not much known about it and not much evidence of it even existing in the first place. Like, we know it exists, but there's just not much writing left from the Lycians. The Lycians also carved massive, beautiful tombs directly into stone, had massive coastal cities, and had magnificent amphitheaters, all partially inspired by the neighboring Persians and Greeks. It's reported that the Lycians existed from roughly 2000 BC to roughly 300 BC, and during this time, they were able to make massive impacts on civilization that we are still seeing to this day. Most notably, their democratic system of politics, which later went on to inspire the Romans, which later inspired the US Constitution. And that's not a joke. Focusing in specifically on the mystery of the Lycian people, not much about their origins, culture, or language are known or understood today. While the Lycians played a relatively significant role in ancient Mediterranean civilizations, no good, mysterious ancient civilization lasts forever. And such is true for Lycia. Because although they had a relatively long and significant run, the fade into obscurity from the civilization was kind of multifaceted, primarily being triggered by more or less of a cultural absorption. And what I mean by that is that Lycia was essentially subjugated by Alexander the Great, essentially taking Lycian culture and turning it into Hellenistic culture and then later Roman culture. And I believe it's for that reason that Lycian history is kind of outshined or underreported, simply because it's more or less of a blip within a much larger story that is more studied and more reported. But yeah, for as much cool ancient history there is about the ancient Greeks or ancient Persians, don't forget that between the two, there was also the ancient Lycians, who had their own interesting blend of both cultures and a dash of their own unique stuff. So while the Lycians don't really get the credit they deserve, I definitely thought it was worth mentioning them in this video because even though they didn't necessarily bend the mind of archaeologists, they still made a major impact on human history. The Tartessians. The Tartessians are a very interesting and mysterious civilization that not only existed but flourished in modern-day Spain. Nearly everything we know about the Tartessians comes from secondhand accounts because there is almost zero recorded literature from the Tartessians directly. However, we do have some records from the Phoenicians and later the Greeks, who often encountered and traded with the Tartessians. According to these accounts, the Tartessians were known for their extravagant wealth, primarily coming from their mining operations, metalworking, and of course trade of both of those goods. It's reported that the Tartessians lived in a kingdom known as Tartessos. No, not tartar sauce, Tartessos. It's believed that Tartessos existed from roughly 9th century to 5th century BC. And interestingly, unlike basically every other civilization we've discussed, the evidence around the disappearance of the Tartessians does not suggest a gradual decline whatsoever. It actually suggests an abrupt vanishing of the entire civilization, for reasons we'll get into in a moment. The first major Tartessian site that was excavated happened all the way back in 1930, but it wasn't until 1978 when more significant findings happened. And even today, archaeologists are still excavating more Tartessian sites, with one recent notable excavation happening coming only in 2015. Historians and archaeologists describe Tartessos as one of the first true Western European civilizations. Now, diving back into the whole mystery aspect, out of all of the reference that we have to the Tartessians in texts from other civilizations, we really only have the name of one figure. He was a king named Argantonios, and this dude was dripped out. Not only was he pictured wearing a gold hat, a gold belt, gold arm cuffs, but this dude also had a gold chain and gold nipple covers. But here's the deal. What makes the Tartessians so interesting is simply how they had seemingly everything going for them. They were a strong, rich, advanced civilization that were reported to have not only magnificent metal reserves, specifically silver and gold, but also advanced architecture. And on top of being developed, well-planned, and wealthy, they also had great strategic trade relations with the Greeks and Phoenicians. And on top of that, Tartessos was in a very geographically strategic location as well. However, even with all of this working in their favor, they still ended up having a relatively short run as a civilization. Essentially, none of their own personal records have ever been discovered, and most importantly, it's believed that they basically vanished seemingly overnight. And I know I teased it earlier, so now let's actually discuss the theories on what could have happened to the Tartessians. And well, obviously, nobody knows for sure. There is a few primary theories. The first and potentially most likely being that there was a massive economic collapse due to either mining or trade disruptions in the area. Another theory suggests that there was ongoing internal conflicts that ended up leading to political collapse, which left the area vulnerable to essentially be absorbed by neighboring societies. But besides those two theories, two more out there theories are the following. One less common theory believes that the Tartessians could have been taken out by a massive earthquake that was followed by a tsunami that destroyed all of the key ports within Tartessos, leaving them vulnerable and poor. And another less common theory suggests that the Tartessians could have potentially deliberately abandoned their own civilization as part of some sort of societal upheaval. But this, in my opinion, is unlikely. Unless the economic and political situation was that bad where abandoning an extremely strategic and long-term successful area was worth it, I don't think this was something that they would have done. But honestly, we have no idea. So your guess is as good as mine. The Hittites. Okay, I know the Hittites aren't necessarily a mysterious or unknown culture, but I wanted to mention them, one, because they're interesting, and two, because they're kind of a precursor to the next group of people I'm really excited to discuss. The Hittites existed during the Bronze Age. No, not... Okay, I'm done making that joke. But seriously, the ancient Hittite civilization is likely most notable because of its brief rivalry that it had with Egypt, specifically the Battle of Kadesh. The Hittite Empire at its peak was surprisingly large, and most interestingly, the core of this empire was known as the Land of Hatti, which interestingly is where I'm from. Okay, that was dumb. Hittite culture was unique, but also had a lot of similarities of Egyptian culture at the time. However, one major difference was the severe lack of massive architecture left by the Hittites. The Hittites did leave interesting and intricate sculptures and monuments, but nothing anywhere near the scale of the Egyptians. However, one thing that the Hittites did an extremely good job of, something that nobody else in this list was able to do, was have amazing record keeping. And what the Hittites lacked in architecture and monuments, they definitely made up for in records. And these records give us an extremely detailed glimpse into their history, culture, and day-to-day way of life. And when I say they left records, I mean they left records. In total, there have been tens of thousands of clay tablets that have been discovered, all being associated with the royal archive of the Hittite Empire. These tablets were, of course, inscribed in Hittite along with other languages. And interestingly, the language in which these tablets were recorded are some of the oldest Indo-European languages ever. And to further example the Egyptian influence in Hittite culture, Hittite could also be written with hieroglyphs. And on top of just their writing, they also had their own mini sphinxes, along with other Egyptian-esque carvings and sculptures. And as cool as that is, the Hittite Empire unfortunately ended up being just another casualty in the Bronze Age collapse, a rather tumultuous period of time that took place in between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, something that we discuss at length in our In Every Time Period series. One of the major contributing factors to this Bronze Age collapse was the seemingly never-ending line of assaults from barbarians and sea peoples, which just so happens to bring us to our next civilization. But before we get to that civilization, I just want to say, if you guys are enjoying this video about mysterious ancient civilizations and want more, please let me know by either leaving a comment or leaving a like on this video. There are so many cool ancient civilizations, and I can't put them all in one video. Oh, and by the way, YouTube literally tells me that 75% of you guys are not even subscribed, which isn't very bro of you. But regardless, let's keep moving. The Sea Peoples. I see peoples. Do you see peoples? The Sea Peoples saw peoples. Let me show you what the Sea Peoples saw. Diving back into the realm of mystery, we have the Sea Peoples, one of the more mysterious ancient civilizations, akin to one of the first few entries on this list. As I alluded to in the previous section, the Sea Peoples were more or less of a mysterious group of seafaring raiders that seemingly had the sole goal of destroying every civilization they could get their grubby hands on. And they were most active in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea during the late Bronze Age, roughly 1200 BC. The term Sea Peoples doesn't necessarily refer to one specific organized civilization, but rather a group of loosely affiliated tribes. But that's just a theory. No, literally, like the origins of the Sea Peoples is still heavily debated and not understood basically whatsoever. In almost every other section of the video we've talked about, we've discussed some extremely significant, genuine civilizations that were really only discovered in the 1990s. However, this one random group of, well, Bronze Age pirates that only existed for a small amount of time relatively was one of the only entries on this list to be discovered relatively long ago. And what I mean by this is that the Sea Peoples were initially theorized all the way back in 1855 by Oliver Charles Camille, a French Egyptologist. And his theories about the Sea People are essentially spawned from ancient Egyptian texts that claimed that Egypt was consistently being attacked via the Mediterranean Sea by groups of unknown seafarers. But it wasn't only the Egyptians that were given trouble by the Sea Peoples, and the Egyptians were actually one of the lucky few to survive the attacks of the Sea Peoples. Other groups such as the Hittites we discussed earlier were actually not only attacked but effectively wiped out largely in part due to the attacks of Sea Peoples and other tribes. According to recorded accounts from the Egyptians, the Sea Peoples were really only a problem for a few decades. And eventually, after one too many attacks and after the fall of one too many neighboring civilizations, the Egyptians apparently had enough and ended up wiping out the entirety of all Sea People. It's believed that over the course of a few battles, a vast majority of Sea People were killed, and those who weren't killed essentially continued their migration and ended up eventually assimilating into another existing culture, once again more or less being absorbed. I find this entry likely the most interesting and potentially the most crazy on this entire list, which is why I knew I had to save it for the end. And it's kind of hilarious when you think about it. The Sea Peoples have no known origin, they only existed for like 30-40 years. Everything we know about them was essentially that they just spawned out of nowhere on boats and had the sole intention of collapsing societies and trying to bring down Egypt, and then after enough time, Egypt was just done with it, wiped them out, and then they were essentially banished from existence and most history books. And because of this, today, the whole Sea Peoples concept and history is still one of the biggest mysteries in ancient Mediterranean history, and honestly, all of human history. And it kind of makes me theorize, okay, was this just some crazy mystery that happened? Or are we potentially missing some of the original facts from the writings found about these people? Because honestly, nothing about the Sea Peoples really makes sense, but for that reason, I love them that much more. But ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. The first of hopefully many videos about ancient civilizations. But in case this hasn't satisfied your ancient history desire yet, check out the video on screen right now. It's a video I made about ancient mysteries that were just recently solved. It's so interesting, and it also provides more answers than this video is able to. Thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, trust me, bro.